Good morning. So, welcome to this session. I must thank Mathrubhumi for this, but there's somebody else I need to thank. So, I will start with that. Just over a year ago, nearly 2 years ago, I happened to have a private conversation with a lady called Meera Nanda. She's a philosopher of science. And she was talking about how the first generation of women scholars in India who had done a lot of pioneering work were all now in their twilight years. And she said it's a shame that somebody isn't chasing them and persuading them to write their autobiographies or memoirs. And among the names we discussed, one was Maitreyi Krishnaraj. And quite by chance, I happened to be in touch with her. So I mentioned the fact that Maitreyi had been working on her memoirs, but it was incomplete. And Meera was so excited. She actually went to Bangalore and visited Maitreyi, who was staying with her daughter, hoping to persuade her to finish the work and to get it published. I mentioned Sharadamani teacher, and I told her that I know that she is working on her memoirs. At that point, she was working on her memoirs. And then we spoke about Leela Didi. So, Meera was familiar with Leela Didi's work. She knew it very well. And I said, I know her. She said, then you should be doing this job. Go persuade her to write. So I've been trying to persuade her to write her memoirs for 2.5 years. She doesn't budge. She says, no, it's all there in this book. I'll come to the book later. But we talk a lot. And I think I know quite a bit about her life from those conversations. I'm a richer man for that. So are the memoirs coming out? It doesn't look like it. But I happened to meet Sudhir from Mathrubhumi, and I mentioned this. And I thought that if she spoke about her life and some journalists were to record it, and maybe it would be wonderful material for the Mathrubhumi Weekly. It could be serialized. It would be, in a sense, a story of India in the 20th century. But Mathrubhumi is thinking about it, I think. But one result is this session. So I must thank Sudhir, but before that I must thank Meera Nanda for this. And of course we have to thank this lady, extremely modest, but when you hear more about her, you'll realize that there's quite a lot of achievement and a lot of things that she's witnessed. And let's dig into her to find out. I spoke to her about this session, and she insisted that she would only speak about her work, all right? So which I thought is good, but at the same time I thought it could be better if we knew something about her life. She refuses to talk about her life. So I'm going to tell you a few things about her background, all right? So her background is formidable. In a sense, she comes from the top 1%, if you think in terms of both economic and intellectual and perhaps social wealth and so on. Her grandfather was in Mysore, very close to the royal family. One of the Vodayars actually appointed him as a personal tutor. He was not just a personal tutor to him. He's described as the guru of seers, which for me is a strange phrase, but that's what he was. I think there were important mutts in India, the heads of whom were his student. He began life as a physics teacher, but soon moved to Advaita. And he was one of those who helped establish the Ramakrishna mission in Mysore. In 1937, I'm told that he was the only delegate from India who participated in a discussion on philosophy at the Sorbonne in Paris. Among his students were some very famous people, including Dr. S. Radhakrishnan, all right? There was Paul Brunton, the mystic, and there was also Carl Jung, the psychologist. These were people whom Leela Didi's grandfather knew personally. She had stayed with them, interacted with them, and so on. Now, this gentleman, in a sense, is the background to her family. And then there was a father who was also a scholar. He came from Tamil Nadu, but he taught economics for a while. He moved on to law. His PhD is on law. Mr. Srikantan, a fabulous character again. But then, more than these two, the one person in her family I found really fascinating was her mother. Married at 12, widowed at 30, with 4 children, almost no formal education. And then widowed at 30 and having to look after not just these 4 children, but a lot of other people from the larger family who would drop in because there was a grandfather's tradition of hosting a whole lot of relatives. All this is there in this wonderful book that she helped produce, and she has a wonderful essay in it called The Tyranny of Tradition. All right, it is all there, and so if you ask Leela Didi about it, will say, oh, she says, just go read the book. All right. But then in conversations, you know, you learn a lot of wonderful things, not just about the family, but things that tell us about India and the kind of changes India has been through. So Leela Didi grew up in Mysore, and you must remember that I'm told in their backyard there was a small door that led to the backyard of the next house. And if you popped outside into the next house, do you know who lived there? Raja Ramanna lived there. Down the street was Dr. S. Radhakrishnan. A little further down the street was R.K. Narayan. There was A.K. Ramanujan living not too far away. These are just a few of the people with whom she grew up. But this was an idyllic age, and it passed on. Idyllic age for the men, not the women. You'll find out when you read the book. But what happened was that she shifted to Bangalore after some time. And then her father died very young. So the mother was left with her own resources. No formal education, remember? But she was a remarkable woman, and she decided that the best way to bring up her children was to break with tradition, a clean break. She took away her kids with her to Ahmedabad, and then later to Baroda. And here it was in Baroda that Leela Didi went to college, MS University, to do her PG in sociology and economics. And that is where, while still a student, partly because she also wanted to earn some money, and partly because she was very influenced by one of her teachers, she began to do the first of the kind of social work for which she should be respected. And I think, shall we start with that, Didi? Okay. So in Baroda, she conducted a market survey for Hindustan Lever, but the whole thing was guided by none other than M.S. Srinivas. So let's hear what Leela Didi has to talk about that. Tell us about
Thank you very much for this fabulous introduction. And I think, let me pick up on the Twilight Zone. Good, you reminded me. It gives me, how long will I last? So anyway.
I think you're going to last another 20 years.
The second thing is that you said I've asked her for 2 years. Can you hear me? The 2 years to write, but she didn't write. But that's because I don't know to write. Okay.
That's not the evidence of the books she's produced.
Okay, so let me take your first question. I think it's very interesting that the Baroda University did have a very eminent sociologist in M.N. Srinivas, and they sent a small note saying, can you send 3 candidates for a job? I knew Srinivas very well because he was from Mysore. But then he said, Leela, why don't you try and go for this interview? Anyway, I was looking for a job, and I said, okay, no problem. So 3 girls were sent. And, the only place they could interview was the railway station or retiring room or something. That was the most thing. Anyway, they didn't tell us anything. So anyway, I went for the interview, and it was all very quick. The next day they said, yes, you've got the job. So I went very proudly and went to Srinivas and said, I've got the job. He said, oh, I know you will get the job because I sent 2 utterly hopeless people. they won't be able to choose them. So I said, all right. Okay, anyway, the job started, and the next joke there is that this was for Hindustan Lever. This was their market research at that point of time. And the girls had to go and collect information. And so they sent somebody from Bombay to train me. And this lady came, and then she said, you have to go every 10 days, and these are the houses you have to interview, and all that. Then she added, she says, Hindustan Lever makes a lot of money. They don't know how to spend it. So you don't have to take this very seriously. You just go and fill up whatever is possible and then send it because they want to spend the money. Anyway, that was the introduction and training for me. But anyway, I was fresh. I did go and do a sample survey and went to these 100 households and all that. What was interesting is, as it would happen in life, the last day I went, the last time I went, and not the last day, the man who opened the door just closed the door on me and said that you people come and rob all the things, spoil our men, and you come from outside, you better, you don't come and you ask the same questions every 10 days. Because I was supposed to ask the same questions. Did you buy soap? Did you see any advertisement? There was no TV. Some useless questions. And most of the households in Gujarat, nobody bought a paper. They would know about stock market. Newspapers were not something that they had heard about. And they would not really also tell you. And very poor households didn't have anything. There was no job, no money. What is this? So all the schedules were just no, or cross, and were sent back. But then I think what I want to tell you is that there was one lesson I learned from it. And that was that you can't enter a house, whether it's poor or rich. Just go and knock and say, give me the information, unless you are from the government. So I think that stood me in great, there was a lesson that I learned from that, and I also felt that if I meet somebody from Hindustan Lever, I would tell them, this is not the way to do market research. Anyway, those days are gone.
All right. There are many more lessons she learned, but those are meant for my ears alone. And I can tell you they're fabulous lessons. Okay, so that was her work, or introduction to this kind of work. But remember, she was trained by M.N. Srinivas, and we know that M.N. Srinivas was different from many other sociologists in that he believed not just in abstract theory, but in the importance of field work, of actually gathering data and actually speaking to people. And that was what Leela Didi was very good at. She went to various places. She got married to Dr. Gulati, and then they were in Washington, D.C., they were in Jamaica, they were in New Delhi, and I think there are some other places as well. But eventually she found herself one day in Kovalam. And that's because Dr. Gulati had been invited to join the CDS. And she said the fresh air and the water in Kovalam was so seductive, they decided, yeah, we are going to spend the rest of our lives here. Soon after that, there was a problem at the CDS when their stuff arrived from Delhi. Some local labor came there, and she learned the meaning of the phrase attimari. And that was enough to change her her ideas about the fresh air and the water. But anyway, she settled down here in the CDS. And then she began to do some work at the CDS. And this work involved work among fishermen. It involved work among construction, people in the construction industry, women in the construction industry. And she published a number of papers, and together they were called, I think, what's the name, Didi? Profiles in?
Female poverty.
Female poverty. And that again is a title that Dr. M.N. Srinivas suggested. So this was a fabulous piece of work, hardly recognized in academic circles, but recognized by some people. For instance, I learned much later from Leela Didi that Professor Ayyappan, A. Ayyappan, who was, remember, an anthropologist of international repute, actually wrote her a 3-page letter of appreciation for the work she had done. The work got noticed, not here in Kerala or indeed in India, but it got noticed in places in Europe and in Chicago. And so I'll ask her about this. So what was it about the profiles in poverty that was so good?
Let me give you a brief background. One is that though the water was good and the air was good and Kovalam or Virinjam was fabulous, it was divine, but it was very difficult to spend time if you didn't have work. And so the one thing that was the only avenue open was to do research. I don't think I was really a research scholar or really a bright person as that, but this was a great thing. So I think I was very close to the library of the CDS, and the CDS did have a very good library. So I started thinking, why not look at the census and look at interstate differences in women's work and women's occupational distribution and things like that. And so I think, I published a few papers, all statistical. It didn't give any insight as such, but it was a time pass. And then I think what was good was that it just happened. Again, this is life. It just happened that the International Women's Year started just when I published these articles. They thought here there was a profound scholar who was interested in women, and so the UGC came, and they said, yes, if you want any funding. M.N. Srinivas came. I said, then, we will give you. And I'm in the sense that the doors just opened because of that timing. So I think, just like one door was shut and I lost my job, here one door was opened and I got an opportunity to work. And I think the one possibility to do was, on the basis of the census, that why not look at the kind of work that women are doing in Kerala. And at that point, most of the work that they were doing, they were in the informal sector. They were either in construction, they were in brick, or they were in coir or something like that. And the idea was, with the money that I got, if we could do an intensive study. Actually, there was a very good scholar from Cochin. I think he belonged to the royal family of Cochin. He didn't look royal by any stretch of imagination. But anyway, he was a Verma. And then he said, Leela, this is this book called Five Families in Mexico. And this is by Oscar Lewis. And it has such a powerful book. Why don't you try something like that? So anyway, I think, it was manageable, and I followed the same thing. The entry points to the house, that I knew that the people where I went and interviewed, they knew me. I think, to cut the story short, CDS at that point was doing mostly, theoretical research. I mean, they were economists, and I mean, you say that you go to one lady and find out what she does in the morning, what she does in the evening. It looked like rubbish at that time. They didn't think it was. Anyway, I was not working there, but that the whole approach to research, whether when you're doing quantitative research, and what happens when you shift to qualitative research, really, can you combine the two, or what are the lessons you get? But let me tell you that what is it that I found in this Profiles in Female Poverty, except that, also very informative, very touching, and very beautiful experience. But then I think the thing was that there were 5 or 6 questions that mostly economists asked. What happens to food intake in a poor household? What happens to work on a working day and a non-working day? What happens to schooling of children? Why is it that the girl child is kept at home? Why is the boy child doesn't go to school? Then another thing was, what is the family setup? What happens to the family when you're at that level of poverty? I think, to just give you, I think the insights that one get, the answers that one got was quite extraordinary. One, you found that young boys didn't want to go to school because they wanted to join the labor market. The other thing is that the poor households don't eat badly on all days. They eat badly. The men eat on all days well because they go to the tea shops. And I was telling Vijay, the number of tea shops in Kerala is the highest in India. There's everywhere a tea shop. Nobody cooks at home. Because unless, like North India, we think that they cook food at home and then pack it and take it. And so that was the second thing, the saying that women get more deprived of nutrition than men. Then the other interesting thing was, the household is not stable. The household, the moment there are children, the men find it difficult and they move away. And what is very nice for them is they can always find another partner. The woman with the children is left behind. And the households get female-centered. That is, mother and daughters are always together, and the husbands are nowhere to be seen. And I think more important than that is, why is it that the girl child is not kept at school? What should we do? I mean, my concern is, what should we do to see that there is some proper intervention to make their life better? The girl child is not in school because she has to be at home taking care of younger children or in domestic work. And so even though she wants to go to school, she's depressed. So I think, it was a very useful study. I think, and what Vijay wants to emphasize is, it wasn't really, not in the CDS, taken very seriously, because neither did my children take very seriously. They said, one is going somewhere and she's walking, coming back, and they were very embarrassed that this was research, and they never spoke about it until my son used it for his interview somewhere, where they felt, oh God, my God, this person, he's a serious academic person, but knows about very poor women and knows about... So it did become useful at some point of time. But what I want to emphasize is that intensive case studies do give you the kind of insight that you want for intervention. What do you need to do? I think there's only one message. You need to see that the girl child has opportunities to stay in the school. You need to see that she gets extra attention, because the schools are not good. Then you need to have some other mechanism to see, something like that. So I think it was a useful exercise.
Right. I think you'll have made out by now that even when she does very valuable work, Leela Didi will say it's luck and nothing else. But there's much more to it than that. She came out with this book, this is titled A Space of Her Own, Personal Narratives of 12 Women. And there's a chapter that she's written, which is titled The Tyranny of Tradition. So I love that phrase, the tyranny of tradition. If you were sitting in this venue yesterday, and you had used the phrase tyranny and tradition together, you might have been trolled.
Yeah.
But this is a wonderful essay, and it's basically about women from rich families, from upper caste families, and what they had to undergo. And it's a story of her mother, basically, Saraswati, Saras, right?
Saraswati.
It's a fabulous story. Can you tell us something about that?
Yeah, I think let me take you a little bit to the back, because I did realize, there was something to do with population growth, and they wanted to increase the age at marriage from 14 to 15, some very innocent age. That was the thing. And so it took me to this Kerala's experience with the age at marriage. That was the topic that I took. And it was absolutely fabulous, because one is that the census reports from 1901 were written so beautifully. Mostly probably they were British collectors who were working on, the various censuses. And the Kerala census was so readable and so well researched. There were 4 or 5 things. You see, I had a different experience, because my whole experience was from Mysore, Bangalore, more on the Brahminical traditions and things like that. Here there were 5 things. For a long age at marriage, which I think I want to emphasize, that basically the message that I want to give across is that Kerala was so advanced, so that people don't realize in its social rules and regulations, that when I looked at 1901, where all the girls in India before the age of 12 were married, in Kerala the age at marriage for girls was 17. Now, at that early, there was no need to increase the age at marriage here at all. They were already, second, there was no pre-puberty marriage. There was some other way of talikattu kalyanam, just that, for the majority of the people. I'm really now talking about, the Nayars and the Eravas and all. There may be small section of Christians and Muslims probably who were not that, maybe they were little influenced. But the second interesting thing was, in India, marriage was universal. The moment doesn't matter whether you're deaf, dumb, disabled, or you're mentally incapable, doesn't matter. Everybody had to be married. There was only one rule. The whole family was only concentrating on how to get them married. Now, in Kerala, you find there was no rule. You could be unmarried. You had large number of people among the Nambudris, women, because only the first son could marry. There were a lot of women who were not married, so it was a thing that the society knew. They were among the Christians. If there were too many girl children, they were given to the convents to become nuns. So that was again. Then in the Nair household, if they didn't find a proper man, or if the marriage didn't work, not being married was not a taboo. Whereas, when I'll tell you the story in this, just that being married was the most important thing for the family. The second, I think, even more important than this is, the 2-3 things is, one is that the woman had the right of residence. She was never thrown out of the house. Because in the rest of the country, the girl, I don't know whether these Hindi movies you see, there'll be always these big sob stories of the girl going away, for slave labor, or, it was a tearjerker. And then where all music is also on this whole question of her looking back nostalgically and all that. And then going into another family. All that nonsense was all removed here. There was no question of going away at all. She just stayed, and if they want, the husband could come and join her in her house, if they had that. So, and the other thing was, there was no question of divorce. There wasn't anything that, you divorced and marry somebody else, or there was any taboo on it. If the family agreed and you got along well, you stayed married. But if the man moved away, then good for him. He could move away. There was no problem. Then, I thought, all these things at that time, I couldn't believe it. I said, my God, how could a society be so advanced and progressive and have these kinds of legislations for women so that they could lead a good life? Then I think the most important, one is, I think, property and right of residence, which I would give very important. And the other one was the question of widowhood. Because, the rest of the country went into one big spin with this widowhood. So, when you look at the figures, by the time, if you take 1,000 girls, below the age of 10, 135 already were widowed. And below the age of 15, half of them were widows, without knowing any education, without having any property, and then having children. And the rules and regulations for widows, well, I don't know. I was saying that we always do that. There's the disaster arrangement. You make a disaster management. How do you cope with disaster? Whereas the Indian society, living Kerala, it's a question of disaster arrangement. How do you get disaster back into the field? One by one, you do all wrong things, And in the profile of poverty, in this book, I found that, there was this, that my mother, before 12, she had to be married. If she was not married, then the Brahminical, they would ostracize. Though my father was my grandfather was a great scholar and well educated, but it didn't make a difference, because what they did was, the men took to Western education. The British education, the men went because they wanted to join either as clerks or accountants or something in the British bureaucracy. But the women were kept at home so that they deal with the pujaris and the astrologers, and all kinds of mumbo jumbo was going on in the house, So with the result, nothing was useful. So they were the ones, the guardians of the culture. So I think, wrote this thing, and I could see the contrast. One of the things was that it was impossible. There was no support for the widow, except that people would come crying and doing all dramas and say, we are very sorry. There was no support for how do you use your money, how do you invest it, or what should you do. There was only pathos and crying and external demonstration of sympathy, which would not last very long. And then I think, the other thing was all the rituals were put on the women. That's why I said it's a disaster arrangement. You have very little money. Then they say, no, if you want to see that there is no further disaster in your house, you get the pujaris every month and feed them every month, and you cook for them. So whatever little money you have, you are always cooking for these pujaris. And then that is one big drama, because when these 4 pujaris come to, narrate Sanskrit slokas, which nobody would understand. At least by 47, we didn't know what they were saying. But they would come. They would always make you run here and there, particularly the women. Go and bring this flower. You brought this flower. They said, this is not good enough. This is not holy enough. Bring some other flower. Some such. So anyway, I think, one of the reasons my mother took the risk and went away with my brother to Baroda was to escape this. Because, this was impossible. You couldn't go out of the house. You can't laugh. You can't talk. And then every other day, all the relatives, they didn't come on the same time. Because of transport, they would come over the year. And they would start crying at the gate. Before you try to get into a normal life, there would be one big drama from the gate itself. They will start crying and you have to cry with them. Even if you don't want to cry, you have to do. So anyway, I think what looked interesting was that one had realized the futility of all these things and the way society treated widows, and the only escape was to get away from all this and to see that if you could start living alone. So I think, you want me to tell something?
No. Please continue.
Yeah. So that's how we went to Baroda. It was a risk because we were quite comfortable in Bangalore. But then, to go to Baroda and Gujarat, nobody knew you. But then Baroda University was a very nice university to study. And it was, so that's how the story builds up. But if she had, now the other thing is that if she didn't break away and take us to Baroda and give us a open life, in the sense that, give you the freedom, we would have had a different kind of upbringing, but it would be still very cloistered, and you had to follow the rules and regulations. In Gujarat, they were not aware of all this. I think this is much more when you live among your own people. And that's why I think I always, but then, when I today say that how advanced Kerala was, how wonderful it was for women, maybe there were legislations which were not good, but by the time the Christianity had come, a lot more education had entered. So by 51, even if the Morumakatayam rules were changed, but women had access to education. 50% of women in Kerala were educated. In the rest of India, it was, only 12 or 17%. By 51, for census, women had already entered. There wasn't any taboo of not. So I think, even in all these profiles, one very important thing that we find is that, all these things you read about sati, you read about widow remarriage or widowed and all the usual sob stories for Indian women, and everything was true. I took 12 families from different parts of India, and then no one had escaped any of this thing. We left the Kerala family because they seemed to be so good, they'd never heard of anything. Until India became independent and communication was better. In a way, it is good if that communication was bad, because now Kerala is bending backwards. Dowry has come, and Mehendi has come, and whatnot. All kinds of rubbish has come. People are spending so much money, and they are not able to, they don't have the confidence to give the rest of the country. That just educate the children, educate the girls, see that they get a job, and don't do all this mumbo-jumbo business, And, but then, impossible. If you're in a seminar and you say the status of Kerala women was so high, they immediately are ready to hit you on the head. So what nonsense are you taking here? There's so much of violence and women are doing this, that and the other. And they don't want to believe. They want to believe that they are just exactly like the rest of India. They're doing the same wrong things and they want to continue to do the same thing. They don't want to really change. I don't know when it might change later on, but let's see. But I think that's the status now. Am I right?
She asks me this question frequently in different ways. You know, she'll attend a wedding and come back and ask me, Vijay, what was this? I've never seen a Kerala wedding like this. And then I'm in a very difficult spot. I can't defend the Kerala wedding. I never had one myself. And then she'll ask very sharp questions. So I'll usually counter with counter questions. And then I'll get more information out of it. There's a tiny little story I must tell you that she told me, which was this. She says, imagine her mother as a young wife, you know, 4 kids and a husband and a lot of relatives there. And she has to prepare supper for everybody and then the lights go off. That's because a fuse is blown. And then she says her mother doesn't know what to do. She has to prepare food. They light a lamp and she gets about doing this. And all the men are in the veranda discussing Amaragosha. Right? And this lady has to prepare food for everyone and then early in the morning prepare breakfast for everyone, prepare hot water for all the men to bathe. And they're still discussing Amaragosha. So I think it is events like this from her life which opened her eyes and made her come up with this wonderful phrase, the tyranny of tradition. It is a book you must read. It's a fabulous book. There are various other stories in it as well. And there's one piece of bad news, which is that the publisher is now gone out of business. You know, Sage has stopped publishing in India. This was brought out by Sage. In fact, Sage brought out 2 or 3 of your other books. And now they've returned the rights to Leela Di. So if there's any publisher around, all right, there's wonderful material that can be published. Not to mention the memoirs that you should be able to persuade Leela Didi to give. All right? Okay. So I'll.
Any time? How are we for time?
Oh, we're good for time, I think. We've done half an hour, so we have another 10 minutes before the questions start.
Yeah.
All right?
We have?
Yeah, we have.
I think I want to tell you that how Baroda had a women vice chancellor, Hansa Ben Mehta. And I think Gujarat was not a literate state. They didn't care for literacy. They were like Andani and Adani, only making money. They didn't bother about, whether you did a BA or a MA or anything. They were interested in the stock market and making money. And but then girls were going to school. But what Baroda did was, it just really was extremely liberal and had a very fine arts faculties, some faculties for music. And what I wanted to really tell you as a joke was, most of the traditions my mother gave up. All this, getting pujaris. There were no pujaris, I think, in Baroda, so we couldn't avert any disaster getting them to do any Samaveda or anything. God knows what they had. But then, the only one thing I felt that, I was telling that, your identity always depends on your past background. Doesn't matter. Wherever you can't execute it, then you want a social change. If you're really pushed against the wall, then you can't get your daughters married, you don't have any money, then you're prepared to change everything, change the rules. The only one rule I remember, that my mother just felt that there were good people and bad people, educated and uneducated, and I think other things didn't matter. So when I was married outside, and it was as far off as possible. I was coming right deep from the south, from a Tamil Brahmin, very orthodox household. And then my husband came right from Khyber Pass, just where we hear now, Osama bin Laden and, every Pakhtunwa and whatnot. He had no idea of at least we didn't know anything about the Sikh religion. The only thing my mother did is a very good man. I have no objection on anything. But she said, do you have a horoscope? I was surprised that why she wanted to know about the horoscope, And there, I think, these are the territory of the Pathans. I don't think they ever heard of any horoscope. The children were born. So the moment you say when you were born, the whole family would get into one. Under the tree and the moon was shining. Or there was some bullock cart that went this way on that day. They had no clue. So it was hilarious that she should. That means she had so little knowledge of what this area was. Now we know a lot more. So I think, some things you cling on to.
She told me that in her family, they actually thought that they were all lorry drivers. All these people from Mr. Gulati's family, they must all be lorry drivers, so they're not very happy about the marriage. Is that right?
I think they said, what do the Sikhs know about education? They didn't know that we had a prime minister as a Sikh. They said they're only lorry drivers, They have nothing to do with education, which I think, all these. Whereas I think in the north, they always felt everybody in the south was, the only thing they knew that everybody is very dark. Nothing else. Nothing else seemed to matter to them. They didn't know how Bangalore and Mysore were. So, these have all gone away now. This is dated. But basically in the book where the message is that people change, traditional societies do change, and women who come from households where men are highly educated are the ones who would probably have access to education. All these 13 stories, the men were well educated, and then, the women did get access to education. And my main message in that is the only thing that helped each of these women was really higher education. All the 12 women benefited because there's access to education. If they were not educated, there would be something else. So basically two things. One is people change if there's a crisis. There's nothing else you can do. You have to you can't follow your traditions. You can't do 12-year marriage and all that thing, or you can't bring dowry. Then you change. And then I think the other thing, the most important thing is education. I think, that is the only key for change. And I think that's the message. But the stories are fascinating because the stories have everything. Sati and widow remarriage. The one by Amrita Kumar Sen's wife, the very first story by Navanita Sen, it's just fantastic. It's written in the old classical Bengali literature style. And then she talks about the rules for widows, where the widow would be made to have a bath, but somebody will watch her so that she won't take any drop of water in that hot, sultry weather. So, it was so strict. Just cruel. It seems cruel. The rules and regulations in the rest of India are quite stupid.
Right. Yeah. Right. And the tradition of education and scholarship in her family continues. We have a daughter here with us, Priya Gulati, who has a doctorate in economics and is working in that area. You're a US citizen, right? That's happened to many people in her family. It's happened in other families too, I think. Her son, Meetu, is considered the world's best expert on national debts. So just a minute, I'll tell you something about Meetu. I hope you'll forgive me that I haven't said anything more about you, Peter. So this is it. Meetu Gulati is right now the Per Bhavan Professor of Law and Joy V. Roy Research Professor of Law at the University of Virginia School of Law. He's considered the world's best expert on national debts. He might one day tell us something about Adani. In which case you can be sure that he'll get his facts right and his interpretations perfectly right. Now, there is a page in the University of Virginia website about Meetu Gulati, and I picked up something from that. You must listen to this. Gulati has won no awards, prizes, or distinctions. That is, with the exception of a second place finish in the fancy dress competition in 3rd grade in India. That, remember, is a comment on the competition in youth festivals in Kerala. Remember, he went to Loyola School. So I think things haven't changed. So what happened was, this is a comment on, she's been speaking positively about Kerala, so maybe I shouldn't be saying this. But as soon as they finish their 12th, they send their children away to the States for better education. Not because of Attimari, but because of the colleges we have, and the colleges where I worked. Leela Didi knew about that, so she sent the kids away, and they went to Columbia and Harvard and so on. And Mittu himself took his basic degree from the University of Chicago, an MA from Yale, and then a PhD from Harvard Law School. And I think because he took a PhD from Harvard Law School, Priya went to Columbia, is that right? And took her doctorate from there. So that's a family, the tradition continues. But for me, the most fascinating thing is the story of Leela herself and her mother.